afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are in the world today. My name is Kyle Gonzalez. I use he, him, his pronouns. Currently today, for those of you who may not be able to see me, I am wearing a yellow and blue plaid shirt, short-ish brown hair combed back, and I am wearing glasses. I work as the Assistive Technology Coordinator at the WSU Access Center on the Pullman campus. And welcome to day 3 of our 3rd annual Disability Awareness Symposium. Before we get started today, I would just like to give you a brief overview of the Access Center, the symposium in general, and go over a few housekeeping items as well. So the Access Center provides accommodations and services to incoming and current WSU students with disabilities that limit their access to the educational environment. Through this, we support the self-determination and development of students with disabilities through removing barriers to academic success, promoting self-advocacy, and providing support to foster student learning and engagement in all opportunities available at the university. We also help to foster support through awareness programming events throughout the year, all culminating in our symposium. So the theme of this year's symposium is Fitness for All, Inclusive Fitness and Sport. This year, the symposium will continue through this week and will continue to approach fitness from a holistic lens and will include both mental and physical fitness events. The symposium will focus on mindfulness, mental health, physical health, and nutrition. We will also be offering a series of adaptive workout classes via Zoom or at the Chinook Center. These adaptive fitness classes include yoga, Zumba, weightlifting, spin, and rock climbing. And extra credit in programming will be given to WSU student participants of this event. We will post a link to an exit survey towards the end of today's presentation, which will give an opportunity for you students to put in which event you will get credit for today. However, we do encourage everyone to fill out that survey as it does help us improve our events for future symposiums. The symposium would not have been possible without the support of our partners, SNA, University Recreation, the Graduate Professional Student Association, the WSU Graduate School, Outreach and Education, and Advance at WSU. And of course, the land that we sit on, we would like to acknowledge that as well. So WSU would like to acknowledge that WSU Pullman is located on the ancestral homelands of the Palouse people and on the ceded lands of the Nimipu or Nez Perce tribe. So with that, I would like to welcome you to Yappy Hour. Service animals and emotional support animals can help people with disabilities and chronic illnesses in a number of ways. However, they are not the only people to benefit from the love and companionship of animals. During this presentation, we will discuss the history of service animals and emotional support animals in providing much needed services to the disability community. We will also discuss how animals in general can provide meaning, support, and motivation to our own lives. After the presentation, our hope is that during the last hour, those of us with furry family members will bring them into the space and we can share stories of how these furry family members helped change our lives. So without further ado, I hand things over to Dr. Davi Kallman and Jaymie Vandagriff.
Thank you so much, Kyle. Hi, everyone. My name is Davi Kallman, and description of myself, I am a woman with short curly brown hair. I'm wearing a tie-dyed maroon colored shirt, and I have earrings on. I am a Ph.D. student that just graduated from the Murrow College of Communication this past December. I am an Access Advisor and Awareness Coordinator at the WSU Pullman Access Center. And I live in Pullman, Washington with my husband, Kyle, who you met, and our 4 cats. So hopefully I'll get to introduce you to all 4 cats here today. All right, Jaymie, mic is yours.
Awesome. I am Jaymie Vandagriff. I go by she, her, hers pronouns. I'm a doctoral candidate in prevention science, which is a graduate program at Washington State University. Doctoral candidate means that I'm almost there to my PhD. what I'm wearing today, I have medium curly hair and a blue plaid shirt on, and I've forgotten the other things to say, but thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Thanks, Jaymie. All right, I'm starting off with this picture because it just makes me so happy. In this slide is the cutest dog. I think he is a boxer mix. And his mouth is open, his tongue is just like flying out to the wind. His eyes are closed, he looks very content, and he's wearing a vest that says "In Training Service Dog." This dog was just a perfect way to start our presentation, just because the contentment and excitement that he's sharing in this photo is kind of what we're hoping to express, how animals provide that same level of excitement and comfort to us throughout our lifetime. So one thing I would like to discuss, we get this a lot at the Access Center. What is the difference between emotional support animals, or ESAs, and service animals? And there is a difference. Believe it or not, there is a difference, and it's a huge difference, not only in the laws that protect the person and the animal, but also the benefits of what you get from having this special license. So an emotional support animal, or an ESA, provides therapeutic benefits to people with medically diagnosed mental, intellectual, or physical disabilities. You can see in this picture that I have is a little dog to the right of the text. He is a tiny dog with black and white fur. Tongue is out, sitting in his owner's lap, and seems to be in some sort of little bag. Another thing to note about ESAs is they do not need to be trained, but medical documentation is often required in order to receive this designation. There are approximately 40 qualifying disorders on the approved list for an emotional support animal designation. The one difference, the biggest difference, is there are fewer legal protections than service animals. So what is a service animal? A service animal is defined as a dog or a miniature horse that is individually trained to do work or perform tasks for the benefit of individuals with physical, sensory, psychiatric, intellectual, or other mental conditions. In the picture I have is a golden retriever. He is pressing looks like a drawer closed, and he is wearing a vest. It says "Service Dog in Training, no touch, no talk, no eye contact. Stop." Service dogs provide seeing functions for the blind, hearing functions for the deaf, or pick up objects for owners with limited dexterity. Service dogs can function as a medical alert dogs, help with limited mobility, and improve the life for children with autism. Service animals, one of the biggest differences I'll go over shortly, is that they are seen as medical equipment, tools to help the person with a disability or a chronic condition live their life fully. So there is a difference between ESA and service animals. I've talked a little bit about it, but what are these main differences? There's difference in the function, the protection awarded to the animal and the person, and then in the certification. So the difference with function, a service animal is trained to perform certain function of a job. As I was talking about, they're seen as medical equipment, an extension of the person. With the function, you'll also notice in the 3 pictures I have, they're animated pictures to the left. It starts with the emotional support animal that has a blue vest and has the medical symbol on that blue vest. Below that, we have a therapy animal image. The animation is a dog wearing a yellow vest, a yellow-orange vest with a plus symbol on there. And then above that, you have a service animal that is a dog that has a harness and a vest on. These colors also represent the colors that different animals that have these different certifications are supposed to wear, so that people understand that there is a difference in the animal and the service that they provide. So I talked about the function. Let's go into the protection. Remember, I was explaining how service animals are protected under the Americans with Disabilities Act. Emotional support animals and therapy animals are not protected under the ADA. There's also the issue with certification. Only a specifically trained dog can be a service animal, whereas any pet can be an ESA. And I'll kind of go into the different pets that we've seen at the Access Center that have qualified as ESAs. And then I believe we have Roberto Morales, who is our housing specialist here today, who may give some of his experiences as our housing specialist and access advisor of the type of animals we see that qualify as ESAs. So types of ESAs, just to name a few, you can see in this picture, these are the ESAs that we've experienced and ESAs that typically you may notice people walking around the street that have an animal with a certain vest that qualifies as their ESA. So just to name a few, they are different types of dogs that have not been trained, cats, ferrets, snakes, rabbits, horses, pigs, hedgehogs. Believe it or not, hedgehogs and guinea pigs tend to be the most common ESAs that we see at WSU, in addition to dogs and cats. So there is a problem, and you may have seen articles about this over the years of the difference between service animals and ESAs. There has been an increase in people taking advantage of emotional support animals within the system, and it does impact not only people who have service animals, but other people who really need ESAs. So what's happening now is that there's a lot of fake ESAs, and what happens is a lot of these fake ESAs, people will get fake documentation off websites. These fake ESA websites will charge people up to $200 for a specific certificate or paper, and even sell something as large as a fake vest. These hold no merit. They do not count as ESA documentation. They cannot be used to get you on a plane. They cannot be used to get you into housing or to get specific accommodations. So not only do these websites impact other people that really need this, it does impact the person requiring or wanting to seek out documentation to get an ESA. So these are predatory websites that take advantage of the individual. So one of the issues is if your ESA is not trained to a certain level, what it can do is it can distract or attack working service animals. As I was mentioning before, service animals are seen as an extension of the person needing them. They're seen as a tool, a medical equipment while they are working. So if they are distracted while their owner is having a seizure, that could potentially impact the person's life. The service animal would not be able to alert the person in time. So as you can see, fake ESAs can really be detrimental to the health of people with disabilities or chronic health conditions. A lot of times you see bad behavior from fake ESAs. They can also sour ESA approval from service providers. Not only does it sour approval from companies like Delta Airlines or other airlines, as we've seen more recently, it's impacted how people can get ESAs on board. A lot of airlines now do not allow ESAs. They only allow service animals. And that is because people have taken advantage of the system. And because they've taken advantage of the system, people are now trying to figure different ways around the regulations. I've seen instances and read articles where people would try to hide animals in their bags so that they would avoid paying fees and fines. And then by the time they get to their destination, the animal died because there was no circulation, no air, or anything. So there's a lot of issues with having fake ESAs that are not trained, because it sours the reputation with a lot of service providers. The other issue that happens is a lot of medical professionals have been soured by this experience of people requesting ESAs when they don't need them. So a lot of professionals, medical professionals, no longer provide paperwork or explanations for an ESA. And we've seen this a lot within the Pullman community, and a lot of universities no longer provide any sort of documentation or certification saying that the person needs an ESA. Oftentimes, students, if they would like an emotional support animal, have to go within the community. What we've seen in Pullman is a lot of medical providers no longer want to do that certification because the experience has been soured for them. By signing off that the person requires an ESA, they are liable for anything that happens during that experience. So we've seen a lot of service providers no longer wanting to do that, which makes it much more difficult for people who do need ESAs to get that experience. As I was mentioning, it impacts people who really need their ESA to cope with daily needs. And professionals who sign off on ESA letters, they adhere to its strict standard. So even though ESAs don't go through the strict level of training that service animals go through, they are required to go through some level of training so that they don't attack other animals, so that they don't pee indoors, they don't make accidents indoors, they don't make noise, they don't distract other people and other animals. So when professionals sign off on the ESA letter, they have to make sure that the animal and the person adheres to these strict standards of regulations. So of course, the fake websites, these predatory websites that take advantage of students and other community members, take advantage that there is no standard. So essentially, you just fill out information and they print out a certificate for you. This has no merit, no bearing at all. So if you paid hundreds of dollars, that will not take you or get you anywhere. They will not get you into an apartment complex that requires it. It will not get you on an airplane. They hold no merit whatsoever. So ESAs at WSU. I figured a lot of students may want to know how emotional support animals are impacted at WSU and what our strict procedures are regarding ESAs. So in the classroom environment, emotional support animals are not allowed in classrooms or in public buildings on campus, unless it is an approved accommodation or a trained service animal. So university housing is a different story. The Access Center will determine, after reviewing appropriate documentation, and there's an application on our website that we will post in the chat shortly, whether the animal requested is a reasonable accommodation in university housing. At that point, housing and residence life is then informed of the Access Center's recommendation. Individuals must comply with residence life rules and regulations as they pertain to animals in WSU housing and federal, state, and county laws and regulations. So that means that the animal has to have their vaccinations, their licensure, animal health, and leash laws. So there's a lot of things that are involved that people don't think of when they want to have ESAs in housing. And one of the biggest questions we get in the Access Center is, hey, I have my animal from home I want to take with me. It's, helps with my depression. It will make me feel better. But these individuals do not understand the steps that are involved in having an ESA on campus and the responsibility of having an ESA on campus. So we thought it was a great opportunity to provide some of those background details so you can get some information regarding that. Okay, so can the university exclude my ESA? Oops, excuse me. Exclude my ESA from university housing. So the university in general may exclude an emotional support animal from university housing if the animal is not housebroken, would cause substantial damage to the property of others, would pose a direct threat to the health or safety of others, or would fundamentally alter the nature of the program activity and is not being cared for by the individual. We have not seen as many complications at WSU, but this happens at universities across the country where people may slip through the process and with fake documentation, and then university housing finds out later that the animal is not housebroken, that they create substantial damage to the property. So they're, biting through cords, fabric, in the room. They may be peeing everywhere. We've seen that a lot throughout universities across the country. And then oftentimes, if there is let's say in the same hall, you have an ESA that's not trained, and then a service animal that is used for someone's safety and health is trained. If the non-trained ESA goes over, starts biting that animal or distracting them, that can create some huge problems in the future. Excuse me. Okay, so WSU and service animals. So what are our WSU's regulations regarding service animals? So in classrooms under specific legislation and regulation, pets are not allowed in university buildings, except if they're a trained service animal. Remember, a trained service animal goes through a series of rigorous steps, years of training to get to that point. Disabled individuals may be accompanied by their service animals on all Washington State University campuses where members of the public or participants in services, programs, and activities are allowed to go. All service animals in training, and that's why I wanted to show you pictures of animals in training versus animals that are fully trained, are approved to go through the Office of WSU Public Safety. There is a waiver request that we will also put in the chat in just a little bit. And there is a difference between employees and students regarding service animals. Employees are expected to contact HRS regarding animals as an accommodation. And here's the number listed below, 509-335-4521. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. But what I would like before Jaymie comes on board is to talk about, so I've talked to you about what the difference is, what you can and cannot do regarding service animals and ESAs. But it's so important that even if you are not a person with a disability, you are not a person with a chronic health condition, to realize that animals in general are so important to our self-care and self-worth, and especially during this time of the pandemic, where we are isolated to our homes, we cannot go out as often. It's so important to have animals or friends that have animals so that we can find this connection to something that is greater than ourselves. And with, a lot of animals, it's this unconditional love and support. And there actually have been wonderful studies that have proven that relationships or even just petting an animal just once can improve our mood and how we feel. So without further ado, I would like to bring Jaymie in to discuss these studies that have happened at WSU. Thank you, Jaymie.
Thank you. I'm going to transition to share screen for just a second. That's always a thing. Okay, can everyone see my slides? Perfect. Okay, I'm going to get my setup like I do when I'm teaching, so I'm comfortable. Okay, so once again, I am Jaymie Vandagriff. I'm a doctoral candidate in prevention science at Washington State University, and I will give a little presentation today on how animals can affect our stress and emotional health in college. So my plan for this little talk is to give just a couple of slides of context for why we do the research we do on college-based animal-assisted activities, which are defined by the International Association for Human-Animal Interaction Organizations, which is its own kind of organization that both defines what therapy animals are. I know Davi brought up that there are therapy animals in addition to emotional support and service animals. So I've included a reference list in case you have the PDF, I believe. If you guys are going to have those there, then you can go hyperlink to that one. So, and then I'll discuss the findings of a study that was conducted on the WSU campus evaluating the Pet Your Stress Away program, which I believe hasn't been done obviously during COVID, but used to be something that was done most semesters. And then I'll give a little bit of the findings of one of my dissertation papers, which is a systematic review of the studies evaluating these college-based animal-assisted activities. So starting off, I have a few pictures on the left-hand side of the screen that are screen snips of different articles, one being from National Public Radio saying college students and their parents face a campus mental health epidemic, in quotes. And then from the Wall Street Journal Opinion, there is a mental health crisis on campus. And then some screenshots of some reports that I'm going to be citing in a second on what people are calling this college student mental health crisis. So researchers and the popular media have been describing what's called a mental health crisis by some people, although there is some argument in the research that there are other explanations for this that I can get into if you have questions later. But the main things that they cite when describing this mental health crisis on college campuses is this national report in the US that was coming out each year with at least 2/3 of students reporting that they felt overwhelming anxiety, similar levels of feeling so depressed it's difficult to function, and other kinds of indications of emotional overwhelm, anxiety, and depression among college students. And epidemiological studies show that about 20 to 25%, or 1 in 5 to 1 in 4 college students, meet the diagnostic criteria for one or more psychiatric disorders. So it's really common, and some people are saying that this is a mental health crisis. Part of why this is being framed as a mental health crisis is because college counseling centers, so like our Cougar Health Services, we have a counseling center on campus, similar places all across the US and even internationally, although we have mostly US estimates here, are overwhelmed with demand for their services. So this report from the Center of Collegiate Mental Health has highlighted that from 2009 to 2015, the utilization of counseling center appointments increased more than 6 to 8 times the growth in enrollment for that period. And from 2010 to 2016, resources for what's called rapid access or crisis services have increased by 28%, whereas routine treatment, so just getting regular counseling sessions for a mental health diagnosis, have decreased on the average US campus by 7.6%. So this is a shift towards crisis. There's this idea of students are in crisis. So with that in mind, at the same time, this type of program called college-based animal-assisted activities or animal visitation programs is also used. There has been some research focusing on it, but mostly it's because they've been so popular on college campuses. So my team that I am a part of in prevention science, under the advisorship of Dr. Patricia Pendry, focuses on testing animal-assisted activities' effect on stress and emotions. So it's important that these animal-assisted activities are defined differently than what you might be familiar with in terms of emotional support or service animals or therapy animals, is that animal-assisted therapy is a type of programming using animals where a licensed counselor or therapist would intentionally incorporate an animal in a therapy context, like for say, serving someone who has depression or an autism spectrum disorder as a part of the counseling. Whereas an animal-assisted activity is an informal program where the handlers of the dogs don't need to be trained. And while the International Association of Human-Animal Interaction Organizations, it's labeled IAHIO is as how people refer to it, they define animal-assisted activities. They would prefer that a therapy dog, specifically a registered therapy dog or animal, other kind of animal, does not have to be a dog, but a registered therapy animal should be the animals used in these interventions, but they aren't always. For instance, our study that I'm going to describe first, we partnered with the Humane Society. And so the dogs and cats provided were shelter animals during this study. I think they've moved towards using therapy animals in future iterations of Pet Your Stress Away. So animal-assisted activities are popular on college campuses, where in 2015, a survey of US college campuses found 925 different US college campuses had some type of animal-assisted activity like Pet Your Stress Away, where the college students can go and hang out with different types of animals. It's not always dogs. Sometimes it's cats or rabbits or guinea pigs. But either way, they're very popular on college campuses, but there's not a lot of research on their efficacy, because even though they're advertised as these stress relief and make you feel better interventions, there's not a lot of research on whether that is the case. So more research has tested other types of animal-assisted programs and human-animal interaction either in a pet context or in that therapy context than these kinds of informal programs. So our research wants to know, are these programs just as effective? So I'll get into the first study right now, which is led by Patricia Pendry, or Dr. Patricia Pendry, my advisor in the Human Development Department at WSU. So I always, because this was a grant-funded opportunity, I like to give, right now on the screen, I have first, a picture of my dad's dog, Pepper, as a puppy, down in the left-hand corner. And also an acknowledgement of the principal investigator for this study, Dr. Patricia Pendry, who this is her study, her baby, and I was a research assistant on it. I was lucky enough to be a part of it and write some papers on it too. And this work was supported through the Research Initiative in Human Services Grant number 2144-1312, sponsored by Washington State University's Office of Research and Extension, and made possible by the WSU Student Affairs, which used to be the Office of the Dean of Students, and the Whitman County Humane Society. So the Pet Your Stress Away study was a randomized controlled trial conducted in 2014 through 2015, where we recruited students from WSU enrolled in human development classes, and it took place on the same day. So we were evaluating the actual Pet Your Stress Away program on campus. So we worked with the Office of the Dean of Students at the time to be able to do this research study on the same time that they're delivering this to all the students. Students in this study were randomly assigned to one of 4 10-minute conditions. The first one, and I have a picture here showing it, it is a picture from the actual Pet Your Stress Away program, and I've added in a little icon that has a cat because you can't see it here, but we actually had both the dogs from the Whitman County Humane Society there on little blankets, and we had cat condos that were set up aside so people could choose if they wanted to pet the cats or pet the dogs in this kind of context. So the first of the 4 conditions was engaging in the Pet Your Stress Away program for 10 minutes. So we had 73 total students do that. Another condition that they could have been randomly assigned to was called observation, meaning that they were watching the Pet Your Stress Away program, and we had them they were like 10 feet away behind this roped barrier, and I have a picture showing that, where it's some students some of them are smiling, some of them are kind of still faced, but they're all looking and watching the Pet Your Stress Away program take place, and there's these curtains around so that they couldn't see the animals before their little 10-minute condition to isolate the effects of watching the live interactions with animals. Then we had this slideshow condition, which was we had students in a university classroom. In this picture, we have a classroom in the Q building on campus, where the slideshow was comprised of the pictures of the cats and dogs from the program, and the students would rate which one they liked best, etc. So there were 57 students in that condition. And the final condition was just a wait list. I have a picture here of some people sitting on chairs in the Smith gym, just kind of chilling around looking at, I think they're looking at a brick wall at this point actually, in this wait list condition. So we compared Pet Your Stress Away to observing Pet Your Stress Away, to viewing a slideshow of the animals in Pet Your Stress Away, to just chilling for 10 minutes. We had a really neat research design, so I'm going to talk through it like very simplistically for a second, but let me know if you have any questions at the end. So we are interested in physiological stress. Physiological stress is what Dr. Pendry has trained me in throughout my career here. So one cool thing that we did is we sampled people's saliva to look for physiological stress markers, specifically cortisol and alpha amylase. So what we did at screening was we gave people these little take-home spit kits, is what we call them, so that when they woke up on the day that they were going to come to the study, regardless of the group that they were in, every single person provided a wake-up saliva sample. So when they woke up, they spit in this tube and then they brought it to the study that day. So we set up the day of the study so that the study participants would come check in with us, and then they would have priority access to the Pet Your Stress Away program. Before they went to the Pet Your Stress Away program at their scheduled time, immediately before they engaged in their 10-minute condition, all students completed an emotion checklist to rate how they were feeling at the moment. Then they engaged in the pet your stress, either whichever condition they were in that they were randomly assigned to. So I have pictures here showing each of the conditions once more, either pet your stress away for 10 minutes, observing pet your stress away for 10 minutes, viewing a slideshow of the animals for 10 minutes, or waitlist for 10 minutes. Immediately afterward, they then took the emotion checklist again, and then they went to a sampling area where they gave us more saliva samples because cortisol is interesting and weird. It has this time delay. So they had to sit around for about 25 minutes to give us their samples to measure how their physiological stress was acting during this 10-minute condition. So the findings of the study, we found that 10 minutes of Pet Your Stress Away improves students' positive emotions and reduces their negative emotions compared to all 3 of the other conditions. Although we did notice that people observing Pet Your Stress Away had better mood than the other 3 comparison conditions. So even watching it was better than the slideshow or just chilling for 10 minutes. An interesting finding, though, that we put into another paper is that when students, we gave them at screening a depression survey and an anxiety survey, a bunch of other like mood indices stuff. So when students had clinical levels of depressive symptoms, meaning on this checklist, they reached that cutoff where, okay, you might have depression, let's talk about this and see if we get a diagnosis based on a clinical interview. Well, those students who had those clinical levels of depressive symptoms, if they were in the observation group and they saw Pet Your Stress Away, but they weren't able to pet the animals, they actually experienced more negative emotions and less positive emotions than the depressed students who were in Pet Your Stress Away. We interpret this as meaning that it's really important for students who are experiencing depression to actually have the physiological contact, in particular because we found that the Pet Your Stress Away condition reduced salivary cortisol levels, which in the simplest form means that students' stress was relieved physiologically under the skin, even just with 10 minutes of Pet Your Stress Away. There's also another one of my dissertation papers. I'm looking at how this other analyte of this other stress system, alpha amylase, kind of coordinates with cortisol. And the most simple way I can say that is that the 10 minutes of Pet Your Stress Away both relieved stress and excited people in this kind of adaptive physiological state relative to all the other conditions. Although again, Pet Your Stress Away had kind of elevated, or observing Pet Your Stress Away kind of almost got there, but not quite as much as actually petting the animals. So the big picture of this is I have a picture on the right-hand side of someone holding a beautiful gray cat in their hands, and the cat is getting a nice face rub, plus a little happy smiley face in a sea of sad faces, and then a brown dog getting his chin rubbed, and then some saliva samples on this slide. So the big picture of this first study is that just 10 minutes of petting dogs or cats in a college-based animal-assisted activity makes college students feel better and reduces their physiological stress. Petting the animals also seems to be what is driving the physiological effects and enhances the emotional effects. I have some I can give more information on why that is. There's some theoretical models behind that if you are interested, but there's still more research needed. We are actually the only study to demonstrate that there is physiological effects of participating in an animal-assisted activity. So we need more studies to kind of back us up, which is a good segue into the second study. So in this second study is a systematic review that I have conducted as a part of my dissertation. And this time, instead of Dr. Pendry taking the lead, I am the one taking the lead on this one. So the simplest way to kind of boil down a systematic review of the literature is I systematically scan the research. I limited to the randomized controlled trials, which is the highest quality of rigorous research. And I looked for the other studies like ours that tested college-based animal-assisted activities. So I looked at what they did. What are the implementation characteristics? What are the program things that they did? What were their study designs? And then I extracted their outcomes and findings, meaning what did they find as they evaluated these animal-assisted activities in this causal randomized controlled trial paradigm. So what I found in terms of what kinds of programs are being implemented on college campuses is that most college-based animal-assisted activities are unstructured and don't deliver any kind of content to the students, like giving them a test anxiety workshop or having them pet the animals in a certain way. So on the right-hand side, I have a picture, two pictures. One is the same picture that I used for Pet Your Stress Away, and I have a little flag that says K equals 10. And that means there were 10 studies that had these kinds of unstructured Pet Your Stress Away type of activities where no one was presented anything, you just kind of chill with the animals for as long as it lasted. A lot of them are not 10 minutes, they're like 30 minutes or 60 minutes, but there was even one that was as short as 7 minutes. I have another picture that is half of a slide of test anxiety from Health and Wellness Services. And the other half is a portion of a picture from another study that we did that I can't present the results of here because the grant funders would want to review anything that I put out. So I'm just using that picture. And it says K equals 6 next to it. So there were 6 studies that had some kind of content like that. Where they were either the Pet Pals study, which is what I'm referring to, did have this kind of content where workshops from our Cougar Health Services were presented to students alongside petting animals, and that was compared to just animals no content or just the workshops. Other kinds of programs will have something like the handlers are trained in like a mental health kind of way so that they can talk about students' adjustment to college and their mental health. There's a couple of programs that did that. And then some other programs did things where they like specifically tell students like, you know, pet the dog with your dominant hand for this long during this. So there's a lot of variation in the kinds of things that are going on and being tested in these randomized controlled trials, but most of them are unstructured one-time events. No studies have looked at any long-term effects of participating in one of these animal-assisted activities past 6 weeks after the program. And more importantly, no studies have focused on students with disabilities or students with psychiatric disorders either. Although, again, the study that I'm referring to, Pet Pals, and I've included some citations here in case you'd like to read those. I can't really present, but I can point you to the papers. This included many students who actually, one of our risk indices in terms of recruiting a sample that had enough people that were quote unquote healthy typical controls versus being at risk for academic failure or mental health issues in the long run. One thing we asked them is whether they had WSU Access Center accommodations, and we had quite a few students who did. But overall, there's no one who has targeted students with disabilities or even explored the question of whether animal-assisted activities are useful for students with either disabilities or learning disabilities or mental health diagnoses. And I have a picture of a service dog and a question mark. What I found in terms of what the studies found is that college-based animal-assisted activities clearly improve anxiety and these brief emotion states, like the emotion checklist that we used, immediately after participating. So it is a lot clearer that people feel less anxious and they immediately just feel better after they participate in an animal-assisted activity. But across all these different studies, we had 23 total papers that there were mixed findings on other kinds of things. Like when you look at enduring mood states that are a longer period of time, like how you felt over the last week or perceived stress, a lot of that is like how stressed do you feel in your life, either vaguely or over the last month. Physiological stress too, there are a lot of other studies that try to look at heart rate and blood pressure, and we're the only ones with our salivary cortisol study that have found this effect. And part of that is a measurement thing that I won't go into, but you can absolutely ask questions about it. And then like overall well-being. So there are mixed findings on those other kind of enduring things. But most students will report that they enjoy the program and they would recommend having these kinds of programs. But there's also students who list some downsides. There's always some students, there's like a portion who, if you're doing something like a mindfulness meditation activity, the students will say it was kind of distracting to have to touch the dog and be around other people. A lot of people cite shedding as a potential distraction, especially if the animal-assisted activity was implemented before an exam. So the couple of studies that have looked at whether you can implement an animal-assisted activity before an exam, and then does that help exam performance? No one has found that this actually helps people on their exam performance. And while most people say it either didn't affect their performance or they thought it helped, there's always a subset of people who say, no, this was distracting. I'm distracted by the dog hair. I'm actually more stressed because I couldn't prepare for the exam. And there was even one person in one study who said that she failed the exam for the first time after she did this animal-assisted activity before an exam. So exams, probably not a thing, but people feel better. And on this slide, I have a picture of some happy faces for the emotion parts. I have a dog next to a pile of hair for the shedding part, and then a student who is holding his head in his hands, studying, looking stressed. So the big picture for both studies is that college-based animal-assisted activities make students feel better. They might also improve our physiological stress. We need more high-quality studies to demonstrate this. And more research is needed to see how longer-term and content-focused animal-assisted activities might help different students with different needs, particularly students with disabilities and/or mental health conditions. And I have a cluster of pictures, including a very happy-looking guinea pig, a dog, a cat being cute, laying down with his paws up, and some happy faces down in the corner. Any questions?
Jaymie, I have a question. So once you graduate with your PhD, is this something that you want to pursue, like to do follow-up studies?
I mean, it would be cool. I'm currently not, it kind of depends on what kind of job I get, whether I'm going to be able to bring in the animal component. I'm not particularly looking for professor jobs where I would have more control over the kinds of research that I can do. So it might be a yes. I really hope I get to, if people like that.
Awesome, thank you. And I put a message in the chat, but if anyone has any questions or comments for Jaymie, because this is a really cool study, we wanted you all to see how important it was for animals, for our well-being. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to put them in the chat. If you want to ask Jaymie a question personally, you can turn on your microphone or camera and ask that away. So we'll leave about 5 minutes for Q&A, and then we will get into our Yappy hour where we get to introduce each other's pets. Jaymie, I have one more question.
Yeah, of course.
Oh, actually, no, look, we have one in the chat. There you go. Is there a difference if it's someone's own dog versus a random dog?
Yeah, there isn't a lot of studies that have examined the difference between, their own dog versus another dog. There's actually like separate kind of research literatures on the companion animals or someone's own dog, and then the having other people's dogs, either in a therapy context or an animal assisted activity context, but I'm actually not aware of a study that has directly compared those things, but I know that there is a group of literature that talks about companion animals impacting our health, like reducing our even like mortality, like people die later if they have a companion animal or they have less heart attacks and things like that. And then the separate literature on doing the programs like this. Has the study impacted how programs are structured here at WSU? The only thing that I have noticed is that when we did mention that the using the shelter animals might be stressful for the animals. They did shift at some point towards using therapy animals, registered therapy animals that are trained through Palouse Paws, which is a local organization that trains registered therapy dogs. They have a rigorous screening process. Your handler has to be able to, demonstrate these things. So I think they have shifted towards using and I don't know if it was because of our study and our involvement, but I did notice that happened.
Also, you can feel free to use this time if you have questions regarding the difference between service animals or ESAs or how the Access Center is involved. You have myself, who's an advisor at the center, and then we also have our director, Meredith Goodwin, who's here today. So if you have any questions, feel free to put those in the chat.
That's a very good question, Meredith. I'll read it out loud. Several university mental health or medical providers do not write letters in support of ESAs, citing that there has been no evidence in the literature that shows the efficacy of animals as part of a mental health treatment plan. How will your studies help with this? I think that our studies are less helpful for emotional service animals and that issue because we don't assess the impact of having an animal at home and showing that having this animal at home will for sure help. I think part of why they say this is because a lot of the research literature in that kind of line of work isn't quite rigorous with these randomized controlled trials and stuff, such that there's a lot of consensus. But there still is literature that points towards it. And that's why there's 40 different mental health diagnoses that are approved for emotional service animals. So it's an interesting issue. Our studies are going to help less with that and more with, whether we should continue putting resources towards things like Pet Your Stress Away, or whether we should offer, more long-term kinds of programs, and what we should do on the campuses is more of a public health outreach focus rather than individuals having emotional service animals or support animals. Of course.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jaymie. I really appreciate it. And so we have a big group here today. So I'll